Good afternoon. It's much louder than I remember last time. Well, welcome to our Sunday afternoon lecture series. My name is Hunter Haskins. I'm the Secretary of the Board of Directors for the Martinsville-Henry County Historical Society, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Salem Museum in Salem, Virginia, just west of Roanoke. It is my honor and pleasure today to introduce our distinguished speaker. Jan Mackle Collins has been researching and writing Western history for over 30 years. She's a published author and speaker, giving talks about the aspects of history that interest her the most. Her books have included the unique histories of many Western states, ranging from ghost towns to historical prostitution, to the more wicked aspects of life in the 1800s and early 1900s. Currently, she is writing her next book about old Colorado City, the wicked west side of Colorado Springs, which includes some stories about our featured character today, General Palmer. Please give it up for our distinguished speaker. Thank you, General.
Well, how's everybody doing today?
Good.
Good. Well, I'm thankful that none of you had anything better to do than come and see me today. But it's always nice to see a lot of faces out there. So I'm going to start by asking, well, first I have to tell you, thank you very much for having me. This is my second time here, and I really love this courthouse and this museum. It's my pleasure to be here. So how many of you have ever been to Colorado? Anybody? Oh, good. We got a lot of Coloradans. That's awesome. Okay, good. Well, so I'm going to start by telling you, when I did my first presentation here a couple of years ago, my husband and I just moved to Virginia, and I told everybody, I'm not sure how we got here, and I'm still not quite sure. But now that I've gotten to know the history here, I've seen some similarities between the history here and what I write about when I write about the West. The most shocking of these, I have to say, is that I found out that General William Jackson Palmer was here, and he was the same man who founded my hometown of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Yeah, that was just crazy. I had no idea. So I first moved to Colorado Springs in 1984, and I'd been vacationing with my family in Colorado for many, many years. And I soon became aware that this man named Palmer founded the town back in 1871, but I didn't know a whole lot about him. Aside from what he did for Colorado Springs. I didn't know, I haven't tried this out yet, let's hope it works. Yep, yay. So I didn't know, for instance, that William Jackson Palmer was one of 4 children born to a poor Quaker family in Delaware back in 1836. I didn't know that his father was very poor and toiled such blue-collar jobs as teacher, tailor, he was a clerk, he was a tea trader. The family was very, very poor. I didn't know that Palmer's father, whose name was Jonathan, struggled to support with his family to the extent that he went bankrupt several times, or that it was William who assumed the role of the breadwinner for the family when he was just still a teenager. I also didn't know that in the schooling he did receive at grammar school and high school, he was very wise to learn surveying, navigation, and bookkeeping. Certainly not classes we see in our schools today. But I think he was very wise to take those courses. And I didn't know that due to the family debt, he actually had to quit school in 1851 and took a job engineering as an engineering clerk for the Hempfield Railroad. And there's some fun stuff about the Hempfield Railroad. Palmer did very well there. By 1953, he was working under the chief engineer, and his salary was a big help to his family. An uncle who had more money than his family helped him travel abroad to learn more about coal mining and railroads, because these two things interested him to a great degree. And while he was in England, he was able to meet several important railroad engineers there, and he visited a number of railroad companies, as well as mills and coal mines. And upon his return to America, his uncle actually hired him to work at his own company, the Westmoreland Coal Company, as secretary and treasurer. So it was quite a thing for a young man. So here's a fun trivia fact. In researching the Hempfield Railroad, I found out that it was purchased by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the B&O for short, which you all remember from the monopoly boards, right? Well, by then Palmer had left. Back in 1857, he left to go to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad, which you also see on monopoly boards today. So next time you're playing Monopoly, think of General Palmer. So during his time with the Pennsylvania Railroad, Palmer worked as a private secretary for President John Edgar Thompson. Not only did he further writing reports of the idea of coal-burning locomotives, which weren't a thing yet, but he also learned how to actually run a railroad, and this would prove invaluable to him later in his life. And his income enabled him to help his parents purchase a new home for the very first time. So in his spare time, Palmer loved the great outdoors. He loved being out in the wilderness. He was very fond of nature. He enjoyed riding horseback around the Allegheny Mountains. He enjoyed the fresh air, and he wanted to learn all he could about being outside in the great outdoors. And he once wrote to a friend, "Man has to go to the mountains for health, and he must also go there if he would get true insight into things." So I think riding around out in the wilderness by himself gave him a lot of time to think and plan his future and think about what he really wanted to do with his life. And I think he did it well. So, unfortunately, Palmer's love for the mountains, as well as his job, his career, and his family, were all put on hold by the outbreak of the Civil War. I mentioned that Palmer came from a Quaker family. And what's interesting here is the Quakers believe that everyone is equal in the eyes of God, and the church generally objects to military service because they rightfully don't believe in harming or killing others. However, the church does leave it up to each person in the congregation to decide whether or not they want to fight in a war. And in Palmer's case, he actually felt a moral obligation to defend the North as part of his religion. So he joined the Union Army in Pennsylvania. So as you might guess, look how young he is there. As you might guess, Palmer did fairly well in the war. Between 1861 and 1865, he organized at least one troop of his own. He assembled scouts, he recruited soldiers. He also assisted the Army of the Potomac to resist a Confederate invasion in Maryland. One thing I didn't know about him was that Mr. Palmer was captured while wearing civilian clothing during a recon mission on the Confederate side of the Potomac River. And although he claimed he didn't realize where he was, he had the forethought to try and give a fake name when he was questioned. But he was found out, and in the end, he was sent here to Virginia to Castle Thunder Prison in Richmond for about 2 years. And he was eventually freed in a prisoner exchange. And then after about 2 weeks of recuperating from his ordeal, he rejoined his regiment in 1863. Another thing I didn't know about General Palmer was that his actions actually spurred President Abraham Lincoln to nominate him for a brevet brigadier general. He was only 28 years old at the time. I knew he was a general, but I didn't know he was a brevet brigadier general. I was very impressed by that. So the last thing I didn't know about him was that before the war was over, he would defeat a Confederate force of cavalry right here in Martinsville in 1865. Incredible, yeah. So I have to divert here and tell you that in my life I have what I call my weird scuffometer, and it's this invisible meter that just goes off when something extremely coincidental or unusual happens in my life, which is actually a lot. And so when my husband and I first took our first tour of this museum, and I noticed this book with General Palmer's face on it, I just couldn't believe it. I had no idea that the General Palmer I knew from Colorado and Colorado Springs had once been here to Martinsville, nor that he fought in one of the last battles here during the Civil War. And it just blew my mind. So I got the book, of course, and I certainly didn't know about the plaque out front that gives details. In fact, I just walked over and looked at it today, and I was like, how could I have missed this? I didn't know about it. So Thomas Perry's book is very, very detailed, very well researched, and they do carry it here at the museum. So if you haven't bought it already, I recommend picking up a copy because it tells you all about Palmer's life here, It gives you a little information about what he did in Colorado, but not a lot. That's why I'm here today. The short story is that on April 8th, 1865, Palmer and his entire command arrived in town and assembled right here in front of the Henry County Courthouse. And interesting to me is that he actually came here physically by mistake. He was supposed to send his troops by train, but he misunderstood the directive and he rode here with his troops instead. So the troops quickly defeated a Confederate force of cavalry commanded by Colonel James Wheeler. Mr. Perry surmises that had some other Union general been in charge of things, Martinsville might have suffered a lot of damage, including perhaps even burning the courthouse. But because of Palmer's Quaker beliefs, the damage was minimal. So years later, in 1894, General Palmer received the Medal of Honor for his accomplishments during the war. And I've actually seen this medal in person. It's on display at the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. And I thought very little of it at the time. I said, oh, well, isn't that nice he won an award, you know? I kept going. But if you ever do visit Colorado Springs, the Pioneers Museum has this and much, much more about the general's time in Colorado, but not much about his time here. So this is the part where I get to tell you what I do know about General Palmer. So we're going to head over now to Colorado. I missed that view. So in 1867, Palmer got a dream job with the Kansas Pacific Railway as a surveyor, and this was the first time he headed west. And he heard about the Rocky Mountains, which is the huge mountain range that kind of divides the United States, not quite down the middle, but it runs down through Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. And he quickly fell in love with the wild mountain ranges, the massive rivers, the abundance of wildlife, the blue skies, the crisp mountain air. Back in Washington, D.C., when he had to go for a trip in 1868, he wrote, "The weather is quite exhausting here, and I long to be once more in the Rocky Mountains." He was particularly infatuated with the Front Range, which is the mountain range in Colorado that divides the mountains to the west from the plains to the east. So clearly, Palmer had caught a good case of Rocky Mountain fever, is what we call it in Colorado. So later in 1868, he was able to return west on another surveying expedition. And this one showed a route from the East Coast that could divert from Kansas to Pueblo, which is south of Colorado Springs. But Pueblo is a large city now. It's very nice, very historic. But back then it was just an old fort with very primitive buildings. And Palmer wanted something better. And in the end, the Kansas Pacific chose a route through Denver instead, which was actually fortuitous for him because he was slowly but surely falling in love with the area around Pikes Peak. So Pikes Peak is noted as one of the 14ers in Colorado. There's several of them, and the 14ers denote mountains that are over 14,000 feet in altitude. So it's way up there. And here's a question for all of you: how many of you know why Pikes Peak is an important piece of America's history? Anybody got an idea? Okay, good. I get to tell you all. In 1893, there was a college professor named Catherine Lee Bates, and she was a traveling professor, and she came west to Colorado Springs to teach at Colorado College, which is a very, very elite college. And she actually went to the top of Pikes Peak, and the incredible view from the top inspired her to write the American anthem, America the Beautiful. So when you hear the words Purple Mountain Majesties above the fruited plains, she is describing what she saw from the top of Pikes Peak. So back to General Palmer. Back to General Palmer, who dreamt of building a town at the base of the peak. He had some railroad business that he had to complete before he could do that, because he was still very, very much involved with his Pennsylvania Railroad. Sorry, I gotta step back. Sorry about that. He was still very busy with his railroad business, and so it was during his travels that he met an Englishman, Dr. William Abraham Bell, who became his friend and partner in most of his business endeavors. So in time, the pair were the first ones to introduce coal burning for railroad engines rather than wood. And they also introduced narrow gauge railroad tracks as a less expensive method of travel across the land. But both men also fell in love with the Front Range. And so in time, General Palmer and Dr. Bell would found their own railroad, the Denver and Rio Grande. That's where I skipped a beat. Now you know. And the Denver and Rio Grande ran from Denver to Mexico City. So for the next couple of years, the tracks were laid between the two towns, and Palmer was frequently a passenger on his own trains. So in 1869, on one of his trips back east, General Palmer happened to meet attorney William Mellon. And with the attorney was his very delightful and very beautiful daughter, Mary Lincoln Mellon. Everybody called her Queen. For all of her life, everybody had called her Queen. And she was considerably younger than Palmer by a good 15 years. But he just fell head over heels for her. So Queen had been brought up in a very refined, very comfortable, very wealthy family. She was educated and kind, and she was very accustomed to all the finer things in life. And she was also very accustomed to getting what she wanted. She kept a diary for most of her life, and we're very lucky that the diary survives. But she wrote in one entry that she liked bacon for breakfast, but it must be fried thin, exclamation point. So she adored operas, she adored shopping, she wore beautiful fancy dresses that were custom made for her. She wore dainty fancy slippers that were not conducive to muddy roads and dusty trails. But Palmer was just infatuated with her, and she in turn fell in love with him too. So as it happened, attorney Mellon soon became a part of Palmer's business team. And so, of course, he approved of the courtship between Palmer and Queen. And Palmer, meanwhile, told Queen of this dream he had. There was this lush valley at the foot of Pikes Peak, teeming with rivers and beautiful mountain plains and lush forests and beautiful stellar sunrises and sunsets. And he wanted to create his own town there. He wanted it to be a Saratoga of the West, is what he called it, where wealthy people could come and stay and benefit from the healthy climate. And Palmer said that he wanted to build this town just for Queen, and he assured her that he had a gift for making dreams come true. So they say that one of Queen's relatives had actually been back east out west at some point and was killed by Native American Indians. And their horrible deaths were definitely on her mind. The idea of seeing Indians just scared her to death for most of her life. But she listened to Palmer and his promises of this beautiful city like no other she'd ever seen. And she reasoned that he would probably make a great husband. He was a nice gentleman, he was wise, he was a good businessman, he had money. So she accepted his proposal. And I have no doubt that even if she had any doubts about it, her father probably prompted her to accept the proposal. You know how things were back then. So the wedding would take some time due to Palmer's business plans, and Queen remained in New York while Palmer continued his work. In 1870, he was officially elected president of his own Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, and as the railroad expanded, he would have a hand in founding many other towns in Colorado that included places like Salida, Alamosa, Durango. Those are all towns along the Front Range that are still prominent today. But Colorado Springs was the town that he was planning for Queen was his own special project. So it wasn't until several months later in November that the Palmers were married in New York. And they went ahead, they honeymooned in Europe, and they were probably gone for several months because back then, steamer travel, you know. But it was not lost on Queen that a lot of the trip involved numerous business meetings between Palmer and his associates. If only he chanced to peek at that diary of hers. Already she was voicing her thoughts on how much time he was spending away from her. She wrote in one entry, "In the evening, Will dined with Mr. Spire. Queen remained home and played cards alone." So also curious is that there are no comments in her diary about her pending move to the Pikes Peak area. That was a telling thing. So once they were back in New York, Palmer left Queen to prepare for the trip out west, while he returned to Colorado Territory he was able to procure a large tract of land, and he founded Colorado Springs in 1871. And his letters to Queen, he wrote to her all the time. They explained his progress and described the beauty of Pikes Peak and nearby Cheyenne Mountain and some bubbling mineral springs that were nearby, gorgeous canyons, fresh air. So that October, Queen and her many trunks finally arrived in Colorado Springs with great anticipation. And this is what she saw. Right? General Palmer had promised Queen a beautiful house and a modern, wonderful city, but neither had been built yet. So during their first 6 months in Colorado Springs together, the Palmers' first quarters were a hayloft up above a barn before the couple moved into a tent. Queen tried to understand, she had just married this man, but Palmer was so busy he was off building buildings and planning his new town. And he did take Queen to a canyon, a beautiful canyon, and he had named it for her, Queen's Canyon. And his plan was to build her a home there, and he was going to call it Glen Erie, which is a Scottish term for Valley of the Eagle's Nest. So Palmer did build Glen Erie, but it wasn't what Queen was expecting or hoping for. It was just basically a very large clapboard house with balconies. There were over 20 rooms, several chimneys, but Queen was so used to the much grander homes that she had known in the city back in New York and England that she was less than impressed. So Palmer had promised her stellar views of the stars at night, but it was too cold to go out at night, and the air was too dry, and the winter snows were very deep and very cold, and Queen's Canyon was located quite some ways away from Colorado Springs where all the action was going on. So when Palmer promised to build Queen an even better home than this one, a modern castle, he said it would be, she had to take him at his word, but it would actually be many years before the castle was completed. So as she waited for her castle to be built, Queen tried to adjust to Western living as Colorado Springs developed. She tried to start a school, but she found that the children in the new town were so unruly, she gave it up. She didn't like it. And so with little else to do, Palmer thought, well, I'll engage her in the development of Colorado Springs. That'll keep her, happy and busy. And it did for a time. So local legend claims that it was Queen who designated that the city streets should be wide enough to be able to turn a carriage completely around. And they are very wide streets in downtown Colorado Springs today. She also wanted the street names to reflect Palmer's career and the western geography around them. The couple also began planting numerous trees and foliage throughout the city, because as you can see, it was out on the plains, and a lot of those trees are still there today. And Palmer being a Quaker, he and his wife also agreed that no liquor would be sold within the city limits. Now there was a very good reason for that. And the reason was, back in 1859, another town had been formed between what is now Colorado Springs and Pikes Peak. It was called Colorado City, and it had functioned as a supply town during Colorado's first gold rush during the 1850s. The miners could buy supplies there, and then they could travel up into the mountains where the gold was. So Colorado City also served as the first territorial capital for Colorado Territory for 5 days, only 5 days. Legislators came in 1862 from Denver. I think there were like 33 legislators in all, but because of a miscommunication, only about a dozen of them showed up. So they came to Colorado City to sign the official paperwork to make it the territorial capital. But instead of a budding metropolis, all they found were some primitive houses and some very primitive buildings and a very, very makeshift hotel run by a woman named Mother Maggard. When the men found out that they had to bring in their own wood, they were expected to help with the dishes, and the 1 barrel of whiskey provided for them ran out, they decided that Colorado City should not be the territorial capital after all, and left town. So the capital was moved up to Golden, which is west of Denver, and then in 1867, Denver was made the permanent capital of Colorado. So by the time Palmer founded Colorado Springs, the old territorial capital had fallen to other uses. This is how it looked when it was a Chinese laundry during the 1890s. The building does still stand today. It's actually a well-traveled little Capitol building. In about 1929, it was standing kind of mishappened on the side of the road kind of thing. And someone happened to point out, hey, this was the first Capitol of Colorado. So the elite Broadmoor Hotel, who came along after Palmer's time, they purchased it and they took it over and they put it on their golf course for a while. And then in 1959, during Colorado's centennial, it was brought up to Denver and put in a parade. And so it's a very well-traveled little building. So, yeah. Here's another little fun thing. How many of you know of or have played the Xbox game Red Dead Redemption? I thought you might have. Okay, you younger guys. All right. So here's what's cool. If you have played this game, or if you know anybody who has played this game, keep a lookout for this building, because the makers of the game, they used a lot of models of actual historic buildings in creating the game. So somewhere out there in Red Dead Redemption is this building. My husband plays it. Have you found it yet, Corey? He hasn't found it yet either. So keep a lookout for this. So Palmer had as little to do with Colorado City as possible, and even his Denver and Rio Grande Railroad passed it by. And Colorado City was very disappointed because they had been thrown into a slump at the end of the first gold rush, and now here came Colorado Springs, and they were really hoping that they could share the wealth, which they did not. In fact, in 1873, Colorado Springs managed to get the county seat away from Colorado City also. And it was not lost to anyone that Colorado City was chock full of saloons, gambling joints, and wild women who were selling sex. So although liquor was initially allowed in Colorado Springs for a couple of minutes, I'd say, a few months, the Palmers soon saw what drinking could do to a man and his family. So accordingly, they not only outlawed all sales of liquor in Colorado Springs, except for medicinal purposes to be dispensed by a pharmacy. There was a clause written into all the property deeds that if liquor was found being dispensed on any piece of property in Colorado Springs, that property would immediately revert back to the city of Colorado Springs. Yeah. So notable too, there is a new book out about General Palmer, and I forgot to write down the title for you, but they did discover that he did keep his own private stash of liquor at Glen Erie, which was out of the city limits, for medicinal purposes. Yeah. So Queen might have felt better for having part in the development of Colorado Springs. And in time, the new city began attracting folks from England, wealthy folks, and for that reason, it was nicknamed Little London, and it became like the elite place to go and to live. But in spite of making friends with some of the wealthier newcomers, she just found herself homesick for New York. She just wasn't used to Colorado at all. So they even sent back to New York and brought out the family cook, hoping that would make her feel better, and that didn't help either. So about her only entertainment, it seemed, was maybe singing at various social functions, maybe attending occasional teas and luncheons, but her only relief really was when Palmer went out of town on business, because she could go with him. And they actually kept an apartment in New York as well as in London, and there was another home they owned down by Mexico City. So during the times they spent in Colorado Springs, General Palmer not only oversaw the building of the business houses and the fine homes, but he also made sure that he donated lots and lots of land for parks, and the trees he planted remain today. He wanted it to be a beautiful city, and it was, and it still is. Here you can see Colorado Springs as it looked during the 1870s, as it developed, and then there's a map of the downtown, and note the two little roads that are running diagonally that I circled in blue. Palmer designed those specifically so they would funnel people down to the downtown area. That's where he wanted people to go. Very clever idea. They are still there today, but now they're more like residential neighborhoods, but they are still there. So then in 1872, Palmer's friend, Dr. William Bell, he founded his own town as well, and that is the town that we know today as Manitou Springs. And it was located on the other side of Colorado City. So now you have beautiful, wonderful Colorado Springs, icky little Colorado City, and then another elite resort town, Manitou Springs. And by the way, there are no springs in Colorado Springs. Palmer just thought that that sounded better. Yeah. So at Manitou Springs, the bubbling mineral springs there were long believed by the Ute Indians and other tribes as well to be the breath of a great spirit named Manitou who lay below the water, and it was his breathing that caused the bubbles in the mineral springs. And they're still there today. I think there's 14 mineral springs, and everybody loves to go see them, and they're really pretty when they flow, and the water just tastes awful. So don't drink it if you go there, just look, okay? So Dr. Bell's Manitou was intended as a very fancy resort town, and it was. And he actually did have saloons there, but they were of the high price variety, so nobody from Colorado City could afford to drink there. And he and his wife, Kara, lived in their own fancy home with the envy of poor Queen Palmer. And it was General Palmer's hope that Queen would become good friends with the Bells. And the problem, unfortunately, lay with the Bells' marriage and Kara's eccentricities. So Mr. Bell, Dr. Bell, I should say, would eventually build Kara this house, a fabulous castle-like home, still stands today. It's called Briarhurst, which Queen did not yet have. So there was a bone of contention. And the stories of the Bells are fun, but maybe Queen didn't think so much. Briarhurst is a restaurant now, but it was designed with a large open door space. It kind of went in a circle around inside. And that's because the Bells absolutely adored each other, and they wanted a place where they could chase each other around and frolic. So yeah, so that's how it was designed. And Kara was, sometimes she could just be quite silly. She was a little absent-minded. One time, they had a big anniversary party at Briarhurst. There's a big turnout for it. And Kara realized only at the end of the night that she was still wearing her muddy boots under her dress rather than her dance slippers. Another time, she and Dr. Bell were out in their carriage, and they saw another couple they knew, and Kara waved at him and said, "Oh, we're gonna dine out tonight. It's such a nice evening." She had completely forgotten that she had invited that couple to have dinner at Briarhurst with them, and that's where they were going. And on at least one occasion, she also forgot to pick up one of her children for the babysitter for several hours before she realized, oh, I left him over here. So although Queen liked the Bells, it's very hard to say that she actually enjoyed her friendship with them. And she still distrusted Colorado Springs. It was still far too primitive for her. So when she became pregnant with her first daughter, Elsie, she was very much against giving birth in Colorado. So instead, she returned to New York to have Elsie in a modern hospital, modern for the time. And of all the Palmer children, there are 3 of them. Elsie is the one where I have found the most pictures of her, and I guess because she's the oldest. But she was also the subject of several paintings by this gentleman, John Singer Sargent. And this haunting painting of her, if you ever see it in person, it's at the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center. And it's like a ceiling to floor painting. That's how big it is. And it's really amazing to see in person. So Queen, after Elsie was born, Queen probably did not wish to return to Colorado Springs, but she was kind of obligated to. So she was back in 1873 when Palmer, in another of many attempts to break the monotony for her, offered to take his bride to the Manitou Park Hotel, which was about 20 miles away. So the hotel was an elite lodge. It looks pretty primitive here, but it was a very elite lodge that General Palmer and Dr. Bell had just recently built. It featured several rooms. Inside this building was also a ballroom, a bowling alley, a billiards parlor. Outside was an outdoor pavilion, stables, a carriage house, a blacksmith shop, a golf course, and tennis courts. So these amenities were described in great detail by Palmer to Queen in order to get her to go up and see this hotel. So the ploy worked, and it was a beautiful day as the couple set out for the hotel in an open carriage, and there was just one problem. The road leading to the hotel wound up an ancient native Indian trail called Ute Pass. Ute Pass is still in use today. It's now a state highway. and it's still fairly steep. They've leveled it out somewhat, but it does climb up through a series of canyons to get to the top. And at the time that the Palmers went up, the road had been improved significantly, but it was still quite rough and very remote. So the party was about halfway up the pass when one of Colorado's famous Chinook winds came storming down the canyon. Chinook winds are very similar to what they call the derecho winds here in Virginia. They just come up out of nowhere. So this Chinook wind that popped up sent a whirlwind of dust blowing over Palmer's carriage and covered he and Queen in a hail of eye-watering dirt. That tore for Queen, who quietly asked Palmer to stop the carriage. Then she got out and headed for the nearest cluster of bushes, where she disappeared for several minutes. Upon returning, no doubt a bit sweaty and probably out of breath, Queen explained to her husband what had transpired. She said, "I made the best use of my rest. I was in a furious passion as if the wind were a person, so I lay kicking and screaming as if I were crazy." And this, unfortunately, was the way Queen often reacted to things that displeased her, and there was so much going on that displeased her. I feel actually very sorry for her. So it was fits like this that spurred General Palmer to keep working harder and harder to develop Colorado Springs into a first-class city. The city was officially made a city in 1874, and that's the same year that Colorado became a state. Now, Colorado Springs was home to 15 or so hundred residents, and over time, Palmer's buildings would, of course, include the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, the depot for it, and the Colorado Deaf and Blind Institute, which is still in operation, Acacia Park, which is still a downtown landmark, and Colorado College, the elite college I told you about. I used to live right down the street from the Deaf and Blind School, and as you can see, it's a large property, and it still looks exactly like that today. It takes up an entire city block. And I once worked with a guy who said that his high school football team played against them. They had their own football team, which I did not know. And I said, "Well, did you win?" And he goes, "No, they were giving each other sign language and for their signals, and we couldn't understand them. So they got beat pretty badly." Also of note is Cutler Hall, which still stands as the earliest building on the Colorado College campus. And they say what happened was the street superintendent was planning one of the major thoroughfares, Tejon Street, and it was going to cut through the middle of the campus. And General Palmer didn't want that. So he donated his own building, Cutler Hall, and he planted it right in the middle of where the street was supposed to go. So today, Colorado College campus pretty much still remains a street-free campus. I used to work at First National Bank in Colorado Springs, which I think Palmer might have founded, but anyway, every fall, the parents for the Colorado College students would come in and open savings accounts for their kids for the semester. And they're opening accounts going, "All right, I'm gonna put $25,000 in here, and when it's gone, that's it." Or, "Do you think $10,000 in your account will last you until Christmas?" I mean, this was in the 1980s. This is how elite this college is. It's just amazing. So Palmer also kept donating more and more land for parks, and the city started erecting schools and churches and banks. Its first newspaper, the Gazette-Telegraph, which still publishes today. He also became president of the Mexican National Railway in 1880. He spurred an interest in the coal mining industry in Colorado, and he built the Colorado Coal and Iron Company steel mill, which still stands outside of Pueblo. It has not been in use for several years, but it's just a giant. If you take like 17 in this building and put them side by side, that's about how big that steel mill is. And I'm always hoping maybe one day they'll turn it into like a cool shopping mall with restaurants and shops and stuff. But anyway, so, Queen had to be, impressed by her husband's accomplishment, but her dislike for Colorado just never waned. And to complicate matters, she started having heart troubles. She was in fact pregnant with her second daughter, Dorothy, in 1880 when she visited Leadville, which is a mining town that sits at about 10,000 feet in altitude. That's over 2 miles up above our heads. Those of you who have been to Colorado, did you partake in a cocktail while you were there? Anybody? Problem? Okay. Here's what we learned the hard way when we go to Colorado, or if we move there and we've never been there before, is that you can drink half as much as you would at home in Colorado because you're at that high altitude and the air is a lot thinner, and you will just get drunk as a skunk if you drink like you do here. So there's a travel tip for you. If you go to Colorado, just drink half as much as you would here, and you'll be fine. So anyway, Queen was in Leadville when she actually suffered a mild heart attack. So they got her back to Colorado Springs, to Glen Erie, and she recovered. But she was so ill for quite a while that she couldn't go back east. So because of that, Dorothy would be the only Palmer child to be born at Glen Erie. So Queen's heart troubles, unfortunately, were a warning of things to come. Once she was well, she just started taking more and more trips back east and to England. Her visits to the dangerous high altitude of Colorado Springs became more and more sporadic. She was actually in England in 1881 when her third and last daughter, Marjorie, was born. But Palmer he wouldn't give up on his wife. He just refused. So he kept working on Glen Erie. And this is what he came up with. This second home melded the original home into a grand castle that was literally fit for a queen, Palmer's queen. And we're talking 67 rooms, 17 guest rooms, 7 common rooms, 2 dining rooms, 24 fireplaces, and a 2,200 square foot great hall for entertaining guests. There was even a built-in vacuum cleaner system in the walls, so to make it easier on the maids as they cleaned. Unfortunately, even that did not appease Queen Palmer. For the rest of her life, Queen preferred spending her time on the East Coast or in England, anywhere but Colorado Springs. Palmer would visit her when he could. I think they probably went on some family vacations together, but she very seldom visited Glen Erie, which makes this image of her and Elsie very, very rare because she wasn't there long enough for anybody to get a photograph of her. She was also very pleased with the Antlers Hotel, which Palmer built in the middle of downtown Colorado Springs in 1883. And he kind of repeated his thing as he did with Cutler Hall at Colorado College. The Antlers sits on Cascade Avenue, but Pikes Peak, the main thoroughfare downtown, runs right into it. I guess that was, he liked doing things his way, and that's the way he did it. So he also built the Union Printers Home, and you can see here that he really had a thing for architectural wonders. He really loved fancy architecture, and it shows in the buildings that he built. And the Union Printers Home was for retired news and book printers who were suffering from tuberculosis and or printer's lung, which is the condition caused by inhaling the strong smell of ink and paper. Interesting is that by the time the Printers Home was built, tuberculosis was so prevalent across America that several sanitariums were constructed around Colorado Springs in the coming years. So it became like a true, health resort of sorts. I attended college at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, and the campus was pretty big, and our oldest building was a former sanitarium. It's a very, very neat building too. Meanwhile, the Union Printers Home, it eventually evolved into an old folks home, and unfortunately, not a very good one. So they finally closed it down, and there was a big land developer that was just planning to pounce on the property and build apartments. The city stepped in with the help of the Pioneers Museum, and the Union Printers Home was saved. And the history that they have found in the old files and in the basements and everything is just really amazing. I'm so happy that it's been saved. So meanwhile, although the dry mountain air was good for people with tuberculosis, it was not good for Queen. And so she finally left Glen Erie for the last time in 1885. She never came back to Colorado again. She instead elected to return to her hometown in England and rented a 14th century manor, Ixham Moat in Kent. And I'm sure that Palmer happily paid her rent just to keep her happy and safe and healthy. He would visit her when he could. The family continued to take vacations to places like France and Italy. The Palmer daughters also would come to Glen Erie and visit with their father for months at a time. And there's no doubt that Palmer missed his bride, and I think maybe he perhaps even felt like he failed her, because he really tried his very best to build this city that she would fall in love with, and then she did anything but. So worst of all was in 1894, Queen died at the young age of 44 years, and Palmer wasn't with her. So he was pretty much left to live out his lonely life at Glen Eyrie. He was continued in his business, ventures, and he was very well known around town. Colorado Springs really appreciated what he was doing for them. But his daughters did come to see him at Glen Eyrie and spend the summers with him, that sort of thing. And when the Antlers Hotel burned in 1898, he rebuilt it bigger and better. This is what he came up with. He also built hotels in several other prominent cities. And in Colorado Springs, he erected several statues to prominent men around the city. And I think at this point, he felt that, like, by keeping busy, it would keep him from thinking about Queen and her resentment of his Saratoga of the West. So most unfortunately, the quality of Palmer's life ended in 1906. This is a guy who had ridden horses all of his life. He rode through the Civil War. He rode through the uneven grounds in numerous forests and over rough terrain. And he took a very unexpected fall from his horse, and it broke his neck. So for several days, the Gazette-Telegraph anguished over his condition, and what is he going to do? Is he going to be all right? In the end, he did recover, but he was a paraplegic for the rest of his life, which was really sad, but you couldn't keep a man like him down. He had the means to take care of himself in style. In fact, they say that he is credited with inventing the first waterbed. It was a mattress that was sewn out of custom made and sewn with animal skins, very tight to make it waterproof. That was the only way he could sleep comfortably. And in addition, he had a custom-built swing that allowed him to get out of bed and sit in a wheelchair. And this is the only known photo of the swing, because Palmer absolutely refused to let himself be photographed, but somebody got one and snuck in on him. And I think the children in the swing are the daughters of some in-laws that came to visit Glen Eyrie. So with this mobility as best as he could make it, Palmer continued his life as well as he could. And he did something really neat in 1907. 1907 was the annual reunion of his 15th Pennsylvania Volunteer Regiment, and it was being held in Pennsylvania, and of course he couldn't travel there by train because of his condition, so he decided to host the event at Glen Eyrie. So he actually paid for a special train and the travel expenses for 208 surviving veterans, and his special guest was the daughter of Jefferson Davis, Mrs. J.A. Hayes. She was there too. I am talk about determination, and unfortunately I can't find any pictures of that party. I'm sure there must be some somewhere. So finally, on March 13th, 1909, General Palmer died peacefully in his sleep at Glen Eyrie. As word spread through Colorado Springs and people heard about it, all the schools and businesses closed for the day, and even the trains stopped. At that point, Colorado Springs was served by 3 different trains, and they all stopped, and they were all like shipping goods and everything, but everybody stopped in honor of him, and the flags flew at half-mast throughout the city. The general was cremated, and his ashes were buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Colorado Springs. Evergreen Cemetery is by far Colorado Springs' largest cemetery, and there's a number of very interesting and historical people of importance buried there. And perhaps against Queen's wishes, her ashes were disinterred in England and laid to rest beside Palmer's in 1910. So Colorado Springs did not forget their founding father. In 1929, a life-size bronze statue of the general on his horse was installed in the middle of the intersection at Platte and Nevada Avenues downtown. He also was portrayed as himself in the 1952 Paramount Pictures movie, the Denver and Rio Grande. And I'd like to see that. We haven't seen that yet. We'll have to watch it maybe tonight. And 10 years after that, the general was inducted into the Hall of Great Westerners at the National Cowboy Western Heritage Museum in Colorado Springs. I'm going to say that name again, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Colorado Springs. If you ever get to Colorado Springs, and I hope you will, you should go there. It's really a magnificent museum. It's really wonderful. So today, I think Palmer would be very proud of what his city looks like. In the city, we have Queen Palmer Elementary School, Palmer High School, Palmer Divide, Palmer Park, which is like a big green open space in Colorado Springs. We also have the town of Palmer Lake, which the Denver and Rio Grande used to service. So we have all these place names that still honor the Palmers today. There's one exception, and this disappoints me to this day, especially as a historian and a preservationist. This is what the Antlers looks like today. Yeah, it has been what we call remodeled into this ugly building. Although local residents fought against the new building, they lost, and I think today, well, they say today that the property is cursed, and maybe it always has been, because back in 1954, some of Palmer's descendants came to visit, and they stayed at the Antlers, and while they were out at a banquet, somebody robbed their room. So they never returned to Colorado Springs again, which is really, really sad. Also, when they were building this monstrosity, a construction worker was killed. And one of my side jobs is I write ghost tours for a national company, and I got to do Colorado Springs, and boy, the ghost stories about this building were just amazing. So stay somewhere else. There's lots of other really nice hotels in Colorado Springs. Don't take them. Go see Glen Eyrie if you can, because Glen Eyrie, isn't that beautiful? This is what it looks like today, tucked back in Queens Canyon. It is now owned by a Christian organization, the Navigators, and they do annual meetings and they do a lot of business there, but they also host a number of neat events for the public, including tours. They have Victorian tea parties, and now you can even book an overnight stay there. And I think that Queen would probably like that very, very much. In addition, in the years since Palmer founded the city, we have Fort Carson, which is a very large military installation on the south end of town. We have the United States Air Force Academy, which is just another gorgeous place to visit. And we have the National American Aerospace Defense Command, otherwise known as NORAD. And it is installed inside of Cheyenne Mountain above Colorado Springs. And I don't know if any of you have noticed, like on Christmas Eve, you might see the news talking about Santa Claus has left. NORAD is the official tracker of Santa Claus every Christmas Eve.
Yeah, we have it on the radio every
Isn't that,
Christmas.
I just think that's so cool. So last but certainly not least, we have the statue of General Palmer, which remains right in the middle of busy downtown Colorado Springs. I remember trying to maneuver around this statue. It has a stoplight, but if you're gonna go left, you have to drive out into the middle of the intersection into a lane that sits beside the statue, and then you have to try and turn without hitting the giant posts that are situated around it because people kept running into it. But there has been talk about relocating it many, many times, but the trouble is the way the statue was made and installed, the base goes way down deep into and under the street. So there's no way to move the statue without destroying it. So every few years somebody thinks they've got an idea of how to do it, and every year, or every now and then, you know, and every time they do, people are, no, you can't move it. So I actually love it, that no matter what the modern developments are made in Colorado Springs, Palmer's statue will always be there. When I moved there in 1984, the population of Colorado Springs was around 40,000 people. And here we are 40 years later, the population is 700,000 people. So I think Palmer did it right. He built a town that would attract people to come live there. And I think that the statue being in the middle of the intersection like that is a constant reminder of why and how Colorado Springs was developed and the man who was responsible for developing it. So there are some books out there. Like I said, if you haven't bought Thomas Perry's book, I would if I were you. And then there are some other books. One of my favorites is called Newport of the Rockies. It was written in the 1950s by a man named Marshall Sprague. And when he was living in Colorado Springs at that time, he knew a lot of the old timers, and some of them remember General Palmer. So his book is actually really delightful. He has a lot to say about Queen and what she was up to. And I will tell you that I am currently writing my newest book, and it's about Old Colorado City, the town that Palmer didn't like. And it'll be out next year, and General Palmer is definitely going to be included in the book. So hopefully I can return and talk with you again, because this is always really fun, and I love this museum. So thank you for having me. Do you have any questions?
I got one. In some of Palmer's regiment buried here at Oakwood Cemetery.
I don't know, because I'm from Colorado. But you'll have to look that up and find out. What, do you have names?
No, I don't. I just heard that some of the
Okay.
Civil War soldiers,
Do you get on the internet?
or, I haven't researched it.
Okay. Well, there's a site out there called findagrave.com, findagrave.com. And you can go on there and research whoever you're looking for. And if they have a marker, they'll be on that. They'll be on that website.
Where
I
do you
love
live
Find a
now?
Grave. Pardon?
Where do you live now?
We live in Ridgeway.
Okay.
Yeah, we really enjoy it. And we came up for the food truck thing last weekend, and we really love coming and hanging around Martinsville. Wonderful nightlife. I love the parks. I love everything that's going on here. And I think the city's really got it going on, and so does this museum.
Well, you can visit Oakwood Cemetery because it's very interesting, and it is Civil War soldiers.
Yeah, okay. We'll grab our bug spray and head over there. All right, well, thank you again. Oh, you had a question.
Just as a counterpoint to the life of General Palmer, General Wheeler that he met here, the Confederate general, if I'm remembering the Wikipedia article I read, right? He returned to Tennessee and drank himself to death.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's sad.
That is,
PTSD,
he died
I'm
like 2
sure.
years later.
Oh, yeah, PTSD, which
Yeah,
wasn't
a lot of
a
those
thing
were.
yet. Yeah, wow. I wonder if General Palmer knew that.
Oh,
Yeah. All right, well, thank you again.
Another round of applause. Now, just a couple more things there. First, again, I have to personally commend you, Jan. Not only was that a great survey of history, as I think we can all agree, but you did a great job painting a fascinating life and a fascinating family and showing all of the details there. That was great. Fantastic. And like Jan had said, we do sell this downstairs. Shameless plug time. We are selling this about General Palmer and many other fascinating historical books right here downstairs. We will remain open for a few more minutes after the lecture's finished, and if you want to look around and ask questions, then I'm sure Graves or I, after we're done packing everything up, will be sure to help you answer them. So, again, thank you all so much for coming, and we appreciate
Yes,
it.
it was nice.
Thank you.